I think the Five Eyes will weather the storm. It's survived existential threats from Kim Philby to Snowden, and I'm sure they'll survive Donald Trump. But there will be a chill period for a number of years. But, silver lining, I'm an optimistic person. I think this also is going to cause Canada to become a little more self-reliant.
This is the Expert Series podcast from the CDA Institute, Canada's premier defense and security think tank. I'm Josh Mull, and while I'm introducing the program today, my good colleague and research assistant, Gabrielle Picton, will be taking on hosting duties. It's Thursday, May 22nd, 2025.
It is a surprising comment considering the contribution of Canada to the Five Eyes Alliance, not only today, but also in the past, and I would even say in the future. Every time I've been talking to allies, they always cherish what Canada can contribute. I have not been in touch personally with some other Five Eyes partner, but I would suspect that some of my colleagues who are responsible for the security agency will have discussion.
In February, senior Trump advisor Peter Navarro pushed to expel Canada from the Five Eyes Intelligence Alliance, interpreted by some as part of a broader effort to pressure Canada as Trump openly floated annexation and renewed tariff threats. Though Navarro later walked back the proposal, the idea alarmed U.S. allies and intelligence officials who warned it would damage one of the world's most critical security partnerships. Here today to discuss the future of the Five Eyes Alliance and Canada's role in it, we're joined by Vincent Rigby, Dan Stanton, and Artur Wilczynski. They'll discuss the impact of shifts in U.S. government and foreign policy for intelligence sharing practices between Canada and other members of the alliance, how Canada and its allies can best navigate shifts and rifts in the alliance, and whether or not it's really feasible for Canada to be axed from the Five Eyes. Up first, CDA Institute board member and former National Security and Intelligence Advisor to the Prime Minister, Vincent Rigby.
Rapidly developing political situations are increasingly becoming common amongst the members of the Five Eyes. Keeping this in mind, how do you assess the health and cohesiveness of the Five Eyes in the face of this rising uncertainty?
Well, I think it's certainly a challenging time for the Five Eyes partnership, but I'm not sure that I necessarily fall into the group of commentators who have been sounding the death knell of the Five Eyes recently, that it's just a matter of time before the fractures or fissures that are perhaps evident today become gaping holes and everything comes crumbling down. There's no doubt that we have some issues, especially with everything that's going on in the United States right now. And so when you look at the Trump presidency, their approach to intelligence sharing, a number of things that have happened in recent weeks concerning cutting off intelligence to Ukraine, the Peter Navarro comment or alleged comment about the U.S. potentially kicking Canada out of Five Eyes, which he later denied. And he said all the right things, but the last thing we want to do is cut off our nose, fight our faith, and undermine our own national security. That was good to hear that he said that, although I'm not so sure that he was telling the truth. I suspect these conversations are happening inside the White House. And just the signal debacle with Hegseth talking openly about attack plans in Yemen. Now the firing of Mike Waltz as National Security Advisor. I mean, we're 100 days into the Trump presidency, and on the security and intelligence side, there's complete upheaval. And I do think that the other allies are looking at the United States and going, boy, can we trust them? Are they a reliable ally? Can we provide intel to them? And are they going to use it in an appropriate, safe way? And are we going to receive intel from them? Are they going to start cutting us off? Are they going to start using intel as leverage, as potential punishment for something we don't do in another area, whether it's trade or tariffs, whatever the case may be? So there's a lot happening out there, but I do believe that at the end of the day, all five members of the alliance or the partnership understand it's important, understand that the world that we face today with so many security challenges, so many threats out there, if we didn't have the Five Eyes, we'd probably have to create it. We'd have to constitute it. And so it's a difficult period, without a doubt. We'll have to watch very carefully what the U.S. does in the months ahead. I think everybody's on tenterhooks. They're looking at their options. Maybe we'll come back and discuss a little bit later what Canada might be wanting to do in terms of always putting all their eggs in one basket when it comes to intelligence. but I'm not one who's going to start hitting the panic button just yet. The alliance is over, or it's inevitably going to collapse. I'm not there. The alliance has been amazingly resilient over 75 years, the Second World War, and it has shown that it can respond to challenges, it can overcome bumps in the road. And there have been quite a few bumps in the road, various times, spats between members of the alliance and misunderstandings and so on and so forth. So I'm confident that we'll get through this, but without a doubt, it's a tough time. I really don't know what the U.S. strategic priorities are right now, and what basket we're talking about on the world stage, and with respect to global threats. I mean, outside of the tariff, even that I think it's hard to explain the motivation to Trump. But if you're looking more globally at threats and U.S. on the world stage and U.S. foreign policy, national security policy, I'm not sure what their priorities are. I mean, it's interesting if you look at the latest threat assessment by the Director of National Intelligence, which came out just a month or two ago. I mean, they start out the first half of the product document is on drug, it's on organized crime, it's on Islamic terrorism. So that seems to be where they think the major threats are, which perhaps shouldn't surprise us given all the bump that Trump was going on about with respect to tariffs and linking it to fentanyl and irregular migrants across the Canadian border and all those kinds of things. But that seems to be, at least if you're looking at the D&I threat assessment, where their priorities are. The bigger geostrategic rivalries, I mean, they still mention, the axis of upheaval, as it's called these days, Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, they're all mentioned in that assessment. But they seem to take a backseat to these other more, I wouldn't say domestically focused, but other non-state actor threat. They're more transnational. So it's hard to say. I think no matter what the U.S. strategic priorities are, I mean, Canada is going to continue to do what it needs to do in terms of defending against external threats, state actors. Obviously, we've had our own issues with China and foreign interference and sort of diplomacy in the Indo-Pacific region and more broadly, their tactics of kidnapping Canadian citizens and what have you. We've had foreign interference in our election. We've had India up to no good. Any range of threats in addition to more domestically focused ones. So yeah, the U.S. is going to have a strategic priority, whatever they may be. They may shift. We'll see. Maybe you will see a greater alignment between the U.S., China, and Russia. Although you're seeing how far that's going to go right now in terms of the extent to which the U.S. has influence or leverage with Russia in looking at Ukraine and the attempt at trying to force some kind of a ceasefire there. So I'm not so sure that troika is going to materialize anytime soon. So Canada's going to have to look out for its own strategic interests. And I think increasingly going to have to look at the U.S. and whatever its priorities may be and go, okay, where we're in alignment, but because we won't be in alignment and we'll have to do what we have to do, this will get into the question of who else should we be working with when it comes to dealing with threats in Europe or in the Indo-Pacific region or other issues out there on the international stage or at home.
I'd like to shift our focus now to how Canada's new strategic focus should be taking shape in light of these issues we're currently facing and the issues that remain ahead. With Mark Carney's government currently taking shape, how can Canada best leverage intelligence to confront the country's most pressing strategic challenges?
Well, again, I'm not in that world of panic at the moment. We are facing a formidable crisis with the United States. There's no doubt about that. But I'm a close student of the Canada-U.S. relationship. I'm actually teaching a course at the Max Bell School of Public Policy at McGill right now on Canada-U.S. relations, and looking at the history of that relationship. It flows. We've had numerous challenges over the decade, going back to the Second World War in particular. We've had differences, and we've always managed to overcome them. And I am guardedly optimistic that the same is going to happen here. Yes, Trump is potentially an existential threat if you're to believe his rhetoric. I don't know how much you can believe his rhetoric, but I think that this is a period that we'll get through. and we will come out at the other end in reasonably good shape. So why do I mention all that? Well, I think because in terms of leveraging our intelligence, I mean, we're not going to throw the U.S. overboard. We're not going to throw the Five Eyes overboard. We will continue to rely for the foreseeable future on U.S. intelligence, and we will still see them as a partner in a lot of different areas. I mean, I know the Prime Minister had said that the old Canada-U.S. relationship is effectively over because Trump is trying to basically turn the rules-based international order upside down. And I get that, but we still share a continent with the United States. We still share a lot of interest and values more broadly, notwithstanding some of the things that he seems to represent. So we will have to continue to leverage that Canada-U.S. relationship when it comes to intel. We rely on them so much for intel collection and intel assessment, and we're attached at the hip on so many defense and security issues, not just in North America, but internationally as well. But having said all that, we do have to diversify. And I think that we've been saying for the last few months that we've missed so many opportunities over the last 20, 30 years to really push for a new strategic autonomy for Canada, that we realize that we're probably getting a little bit too close to the U.S., whether in terms of trade and the economy or security, and that it was time, again, not to sever ties. We're never going to sever ties, in my view, unless there's something just completely crazy that happened, even crazier than what we've got with this U.S. administration. But we do need to diversify a little bit. And so, we've been trying to diversify on the trade side for a long time, haven't got too far. Numerous efforts over the last 75 years. We're still at about 77, 78% of our exports going to the U.S. Will we do any better on the security and intelligence or the defense side? Well, I think we've got to try. I think we really got to try. We've got an Indo-Pacific strategy, which says we should leverage more of our relationships in that region, including with countries like Japan, South Korea, even Australia, which is a Five Eyes ally, but we can probably forge closer ties there. We can also do more with our European partners. And we're already seeing that right now in terms of Prime Minister Carney going over to see Macron and Starmer right after he became Prime Minister before the election, working with the Europeans on defense industrial issues, Arm Europe, those sorts of things. And, we've got some strong intelligence partnerships in Europe, obviously with the Brit, part of Five Eyes, but also with France, with Germany. There's some growing relationships with the Nordic states. So we need to look at those and see how we can beef them up. I think with the Nordic states, this is particularly the case with the Arctic. I think everyone identifies the Arctic as a new strategic sphere, that it's becoming more important given the threats or emerging threats from China and Russia. But these threats have been complicated now by U.S. designs on Greenland and how they may want to play up in the northern region. So we need to look for partners there. We need to look at other players that we can use. So I guess my bottom line is we will continue, I think, for the foreseeable future to leverage our current relationships, and in particular the one with the U.S., but we should definitely be looking to broaden out, to branch out a little bit and leverage the expertise, capabilities, capacities of other intelligence organizations around the world. And we should always be doing that, quite frankly.
Next, we'll turn to Dan Stanton, Director of the National Security Program at the University of Ottawa and former CSIS intelligence officer.
Given global shifts that have occurred so far this year, how would you evaluate the health of the Five Eyes relationship? And how would you rate the health of relations between the allies?
Well, I would say in light of recent developments in the last 2 or 3 months, I would say the health of the Five Eyes is probably pretty good. It's a very resilient alliance. I worked with about 7 of the 12 agencies, including 2 of Canada's, and they tend to be very apolitical. But I suspect that within the alliance, agencies such as the Canadian ones and probably the British and maybe Australians are sort of doing a close watch as to how things are unfolding because of some of the messaging coming from Washington. So certainly at a working level and a tactical level, I would see no reason there would be any great angst or concern right now. But I think there is probably, at least in Ottawa, some concern as to whether one of the partners may eventually shift to become more of a threat. than a dubious ally. Canada has quite a big role to play in the Five Eyes, contrary to, I think you could say, popular perception that we don't contribute much and we just borrow everything and we're kind of along for a free ride. I'll first start with the human side, human intelligence, which is where I worked with CSIS for many years. They don't do an awful lot of sharing within the human agencies, and a lot of it's got to do with fear of penetration and limited access and sources. And so where they do share and collaborate, it's largely on a bilateral relationship, like working very closely with the CIA or working closely with British SIS or things like that. So it's not that, I don't want to say it's not a big deal. It is a big deal, but the bilateral relationships within the alliance are probably more important than that actual alliance itself. Where things change a bit is when we get into the technical side or the SIGINT side. Canada provides what we call some global reach in terms of over the North Pole, Arctic Circle, just as Australia provides coverage in the Indo-Pacific and the South Pacific. And so from that perspective, those members of the Five Eyes have access to a kind of a global reach the alliance provides. And Canada does provide a lot. And Canada provides a lot on the human side. Like I say, I worked with the Australians, I worked with the British, I worked with the Americans. And problem is it's all secret. So the public doesn't know that. And I would say that the agencies in the Five Eyes and the Americans in particular would not want to see Canada's two intelligence agencies removed, because it would mean they would have to spend billions and billions of dollars getting that coverage, getting that language capability that we have and everything else. So they'd probably be as skittish of it as we would be.
Keeping this thought of the US-Canadian relationship in mind, I'm wondering if you can elaborate a bit on what extent US leadership and influence in the Five Eyes shapes Canada's strategic posture or autonomy.
Well, that really is the question du jour, is we got some messaging from the US. It was an aid actually to John Radcliffe, the CIA director, that they would consider using, targeting countries in the Western Hemisphere, collecting, it would be human in their case, to support their president's tariff policies. So in plain English, that would mean they would essentially be spying on Canada, whether it's the government, whether it's the private sector, to, I guess you could say, buttress their tariff posture and subsequent tariff war. And so that shift, it's not going to happen overnight, but if they did want to use that type of strategy of using their intelligence agencies to collect information on Canada, that would be a huge sea change. And that would put the US in a more adversarial role than as a partner. And that's quite possible if we take seriously the messaging coming from Washington.
I'm wondering if you can explore a bit further if there's a growing risk posed by Five Eyes members showing leniency towards traditional adversaries, and how might this impact Canada's national and international security standing?
Yeah, that is a deep concern, and I'm sure it's something Ottawa's been seized with since President Trump initiated that little love-in with Russia and, cutting Ukraine loose. There's an awful lot of equity that would be built up over the years, for example, in CSIS and CSE working against Russian intelligence and Russian interests and things like that. And if, for example, let's say CSIS was to develop a source in, let's say, Russian intelligence, there would be probably some reticence in sharing that with the Americans for fear of leakage or that it would be exploited politically. And so I think what's happening now, I would guess, is that US intelligence is probably becoming increasingly isolated within the Five Eyes because of those understandable concerns in London and Canberra and in Ottawa about the US aligning with what has generally been an adversary. And so there would be a certain reticence to share, to collaborate. At a working level, there wouldn't be a problem. But it's when it gets up above that mid-management level in those American agencies where you can have a certain magna influence, very executive influence, where there's going to be a fear that information will get back. So if I was a Russian intelligence officer, I would be reluctant to cooperate, not just with American intelligence, but potentially with Allied intelligence, out of fear that information could get back to Russian government.
Considering this growing isolation of the United States within the Five Eyes, what contingency planning, if any, is Canada undertaking to prepare for shifts in U.S. global posture or intelligence sharing practices as this more isolationist trend within the administration continues?
I would suspect with this shift that the Canadian government, Canadian agencies are probably looking to reinforce, I guess, and expand their arrangements with other countries and other regions. Now, they already have that. I mean, we've heard in the media this discovery that there's Europe and this discovery there's Asia. CSIS has had arrangements with over 350 agencies worldwide for decades, and I'm quite sure CSE has quite a lot of cooperation. So there's no need to go get new relationships. I think, though, they're going to probably be having more deeper cooperation with some of those foreign services and security services and SIGINT agencies than they did before. And that includes R&D and secondments and things like that. So I would be surprised if that hasn't already started.
Do you see it possible that we see a fragmentation or realignment within the Five Eyes? And ultimately, what would this mean for Canada in the years to come? Or is the Five Eyes relationship likely to endure and weather this storm?
I think the Five Eyes will weather the storm. It's survived existential threats from Kim Philby to Snowden, and I'm sure they'll survive Donald Trump. But there will be a chill period for a number of years. But, silver lining, I'm an optimistic person. I think this also is going to cause Canada to become a little more self-reliant. Still stay within the alliance, still partner up, but at the same time, we need to start looking out for our own interests and keeping a close eye on the Americans as a potential threat. But I'd say years from now, we'll probably find we're a little bit more autonomous and a little bit more self-reliant than we probably ever imagined, and that'll be a good thing.
Next, we'll turn to Artur Wilczynski, Senior Fellow at the University of Ottawa and former Assistant Deputy Minister for the Communications Security Establishment.
Given recent developments geopolitically, how do you assess the health of the Five Eyes, both overall and bilaterally between members?
So let me start by saying that the Five Eyes is a long-standing, complex, deep partnership between Canada, the U.S., UK, Australia, and New Zealand. My experience with the Five Eyes as an intelligence partnership goes back many, many years, and the complexity of the relationships, the actual things that we do together, whether they're technical, whether or not they're analytical, from a collection perspective, from an assessment perspective, it's a profoundly deep a partnership that's based on trust and cooperation and a culture of having a shared series of values and shared broader international geopolitical interests. So that kind of deep relationship that has lasted over many, many decades is not easily, shoved off its foundations. It has faced challenges in the past, including, for example, when Canada stood back from joining some of its other partners in the war, the American war in Iraq. So we've had inflection points or strategic points in our relationship with the Five Eyes partnership that have proved to be challenging. That said, I think that the current situation is one where one of the Five Eyes, in particular the United States, is inflicting, in my opinion, some significant damage, not necessarily to the relationships, even though members of the current Trump administration have made all kinds of odd statements around Canada's participation in the Five Eyes. My biggest worry about the integrity of the Five Eyes is about what the Trump administration is actually doing to the United States intelligence community itself. Whether or not it's naming unqualified, inexperienced individuals such as Tulsi Gabbard, or hyper partisans like Kash Patel to organizations such as the Director of National Intelligence and the head of the FBI, or removing the head of the NSA at the whim of a very extreme Trump online troll, Laura Loomer. I think that those kinds of actions to the U.S. intelligence community really make and should make the other partners in the intelligence relationship of the Five Eyes very wary around the politicization of the U.S. intelligence community, and whether or not what have for decades been nonpartisan technical experts and individuals deeply steeped in the practice of intelligence, them being replaced by hyper partisans, that again causes damage to the relationships. It causes folks to question the quality and the technical abilities of the folks that are doing it, and I think that poses a serious challenge to four out of to all Five Eyes, because again, I think it does damage the U.S. more directly, but geopolitically, I think it will make the four others wary of what they get from the U.S. and also what they should share with the U.S. Even like things that are quite frankly regularly trite. If you look at the Secretary of Defense and the National Security Advisor and the DNI using a Signal app chat room to discuss highly sensitive operational material from an intelligence perspective, that literally is gobsmacking, that in terms of lack of awareness or irresponsibility in terms of the protection of highly sensitive information. So while again we are deeply intertwined at multiple levels, from like the most junior operational level to the head of the National Security and Intelligence Advisor in Canada, throughout that entire spectrum of officers, we have a deep connection across the board with all Five Eyes. But I think, given in particular the election of Donald Trump to his second term as president, I think that causes profound problems between four of the five and the fifth. And I also think that it will deepen, in particular, I think, some of the partnerships that exist between the other four. I think that in particular, Canada and the UK will deepen their collaboration. One of the things that I think has been a key national security interest of Canada and the UK in particular has been Ukraine. The fact that the U.S. administration had, for a time, paused the sharing of intelligence with Ukraine and has taken positions vis-a-vis the war that Russia has waged against Ukraine in a way that is completely aligned with Vladimir Putin. I think that for Canada and the UK in particular, given our interests in that specific conflict, it'll deepen relationships. And also, I think in the Indo-Pacific, I think that we will need to be far more engaged with our Australian and Kiwi partners to make sure that the kinds of intelligence requirements that Canada has are also met through the effectiveness of that collaboration, and in particular on the Indo-Pacific, I think one of the things that we've got to be mindful of, and to follow quite closely from a diplomatic and a political perspective, is the evolution of AUKUS and how that might be affected by the Trump administration's actions, and whether or not, what are the challenges that are going to be compounded by that political difficulty, and whether or not we again have the right tools at our disposal to acquire the intelligence we need to inform senior political leadership in Canada that will help them make decisions in the national interest, and that will help them mitigate whatever risks they're trying to manage from a national security defense perspective.
Overall, what should be the top concerns of Canadian policymakers in relation to the Five Eyes relationship as we approach the upcoming election? What measures would you advise taking to address those concerns?
So I think the top concerns for Canadian policymakers as we approach the election in particular is to have a more, for me, is to have a more transparent conversation about intelligence, to have a more direct conversation about the risks that Canada faces and why intelligence, including a robust and healthy Five Eyes, is important to Canada's national interest. I think is particularly important because, again, my concern is that Canadians just do not understand the intelligence enterprise, and that lack of understanding causes both, I think, apprehension and concern about what it is that we do and how we do it. It plays to certain tendencies, I think, that overplay risks in some areas and undermine and underplay risks in others. I think that we've had some progress, and I think that the Hogue Commission has done a relatively good job in raising people's awareness of the enterprise. But I think that what we've seen in the U.S. and the rise of the shocking rise to Canadians about what now the U.S. is now all of a sudden pitching itself as a potential threat to Canada, that has kind of overwhelmed everything. And I think instead of just sort of saying, well, the security situation, like the Prime Minister, like Mr. Carney has said, Prime Minister Carney has said, the old security relationship with the U.S. is over. Something new is going to come. I think it would have been helpful to sort of say, well, what does that mean? A little bit more, within a little bit more granularity. And the same thing with, I think, Mr. Poilievre. Everybody's talking about spending a certain amount of money on defense, but they're not really being particularly clear to what end, to address what threat, to manage what particular risk. So I think for me, policymakers need to be far more transparent about what those geostrategic interests are and how membership in the Five Eyes, how our own domestic intelligence capability actually helps address and mitigate those risks. And if the Five Eyes relationship, in particular, the relationship, that supremely essential relationship that we've historically had with what used to be this benevolent neighbor to the south, which has now turned into a potentially capricious adversary, I think having a conversation about what do we need to do domestically in order to mitigate that risk is very, very important. And the intelligence community isn't there necessarily to set out what are the geostrategic interests. Our responsibility is to provide insight and to provide analysis and to make sure that we have the capability to collect the information that the political leadership needs in order to make those decisions. So and that's why I think having that change in culture where political leadership actually knows, okay, I can ask our intelligence community to go get the following basket of information, because I can't get that through diplomacy. I can't get that through media. I can't get that through academic research or other kinds of open sources. We need the particular skill set and capabilities that covert intelligence does in order to acquire it. I think having that kind of capability within senior leadership is absolutely essential. And the only way that they're going to do that is if Canadians, I think, expect it. Right now, Canadians don't expect it because they don't even think about it. So again, it's having that transparency with our political leadership. And I do think that in terms of the agencies that are out there, I think that they're really good, and I think people shouldn't shouldn't dismiss Canadian capabilities, whether or not they're capabilities at CF or at CSE or CSIS or within other agencies within the RCMP and CBSA. They all have capabilities around collection, analysis, and the Privy Council office, I think, does a relatively good job. But I think that that's one of the areas where I think there could be more work, and I think that's on overall community leadership. So I know that the National Security and Intelligence Advisor usually has a light touch in terms of leadership, and the PCO as an entity around coordinating the intelligence community has again been, in my experience, fairly deferential to the DM and deputy head community that manages those agencies. I would like to see a far greater capability within the Privy Council office and the Office of the National Security and Intelligence Advisor to lead and to be and to direct far more some of these broader cultural issues, to make sure that the capabilities that we have around collection and analysis actually find their way appropriately and effectively to consumers, that there is a far more robust and accountable process for the identification of intelligence priorities, and that, again, that there's accountability not just on the collection side, but that when departments ask for information and it's given to them, and that, what have they done with it? That there needs to be a knowledge that, if we're putting all this time and effort and money to collecting something, that somebody's using it to achieve a particular outcome in the national interest. And I think that latter part, I've been gone for 3 years already. That latter part for me was always a big gap. And I'm hopeful, lots of things evolve in a relatively short time, but I haven't heard that particular piece has changed. And for me, I would ask that be one of the things that be seriously considered. And that in that happer of strengthening the institutions, particularly at the center, that one of the conversations that really needs to take place in a more robust way and also in a more transparent way is whether or not Canada does need that foreign human collection capability, and then make a decision based on, again, what do we need, and is this the best way for us to acquire it?
And that's all for today's episode. The Expert Series is released every Tuesday and Thursday. If you want to learn more about the CDA Institute, follow us on social media, visit our website at cdainstitute.ca, or subscribe to our newsletter for the latest updates on Canadian defense and international security. If you have comments or feedback about what you heard in today's edition, email Josh at cdainstitute.ca. I'm Josh Malm. Until next time.